Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
the vaccine is here, and that means hope is here.
As the governor gets his COVID shot, the latest on the vaccination effort.
That was completely unauthorized. That can't happen.
Meanwhile, Mayor Lightfoot pulls vaccines from providers for misappropriating shots. That and more, the focus of our Spotlight Politics segment.
Let's lean into the opportunity before us and realize the change that young people are calling for.
Chicago public schools and community partners pose alternatives to police officers in schools.
These conversations are a slap in the face to people that are...
Aldermen debate reparations for Black Chicagoans. That and other highlights from today's City Council meeting.
We have been ready for people to come back in the building, and it's just a matter of people feeling comfortable coming back.
What new research says about whether or not Chicago workers will go back to the office once the pandemic is over.
Parking meters are coming to Montrose Harbor. Why some residents are up in arms.
The city of Chicago is home to more lead service lines than any other city in the United States.
And what's being done to replace lead water service pipes in Chicago and across the state. But first, some of today's top stories. The United Center is now open for drive-through vaccination services. The drive-through officially opened yesterday, seeing more than 400 people. The Chicago Department of Public Health says this is the first drive-through vac site in the city, and it will focus on those who are 65 and older who live anywhere in Chicago. And limited appointments have been made available to those 18 to 64 years old with underlying conditions living in one of 17 of the city's under-vaccinated zip codes. The site is scheduled to operate 7 days a week for 6 weeks under the federal government's vaccination pilot program. Meanwhile, Illinois public health officials announced nearly 2,800 new cases of the coronavirus, plus 20 additional deaths. The state's total number of cases is now more than 1.2 million, and 21,136 people have died. The state's test positivity rate ticks up slightly to 3.1%. Last Wednesday, it was 2.6%. Chicago public school students will return to the classroom earlier next year under a plan passed by the Chicago Board of Education today. The district's new start date shifts to August 30th instead of its typical start date of the Tuesday after Labor Day. The district says the change should help reduce summer learning loss by shrinking the summer break, but this doesn't make the school year any longer. The calendar still includes the same number of student attendance days. And coming up in just a bit, we'll have the latest on the district's plan for changing its school resource officer program. And now to Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Nearly 15% of Illinois residents are fully vaccinated for COVID-19, according to the latest data from the Illinois Department of Public Health. But many are still on the hunt for an appointment, and there are questions about how things will operate as vaccination rates rise. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Paris, more than 5 million doses of the COVID vaccine have been administered in Illinois, and now Governor J.B. Pritzker is among them. The governor had been encouraging other folks to get a shot.
We really do have a fighting chance now to bring this pandemic to an end. We have 3 incredibly effective and protective vaccines that will protect people from getting very sick, prevent them from needing to go to the hospital, and will keep people alive who would otherwise pass away from this virus.
Still, the governor had heretofore not gotten vaccinated himself, despite his own guidance that since early February has included lawmakers among those eligible.
But I also want Illinoisans to know, especially those who may not yet feel confident enough to get vaccinated, that I'm not asking you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself.
It is one and done for Pritzker, who received the single-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The state, by the way, expecting a whole lot more of that to come the end of this month. Now, the governor got his jab at a mass vaccination site in Springfield on the Illinois State Fairgrounds. He says he's not scared of needles, and he felt the same after getting the shot, just more fortified.
The vaccine is here, and that means hope is here. So here's my ask of you. If you have received this safe and effective vaccine, please talk to your friends and family about how friendly and efficient it was, and the process here at the state mass sites.
There are more than a dozen of these state-run mass vaccination sites throughout Illinois. A new one opens in Forest Park on Friday. Now, most, like this one, are run by the Illinois National Guard. Before leading IEMA, by the way, Alicia Tate-Nadeau was the Guard Brigadier General. Sites like this are helping to move the state's vaccination rate up, such that about 66% of adults age 65 and over have received at least their first COVID shot, and that is a key metric. Per the governor's reopening guidelines, things can open up once 70% of seniors have received their COVID vaccine, meaning that Illinois is rapidly getting to that point, inching closer to the bridge phase. That bridge will allow outdoor events to have as many as 500 people, and then meetings like conventions and hotels and such, as many as 1,000 individuals. The phase will also allow museums, stores, and restaurants to increase their capacity limits up to 60% or more if those in attendance are fully vaccinated. Per the rules, folks who are fully vaccinated do not count toward those capacity limits. Chef Rodolfo Quadros of Bucktown's Pan-Latin restaurant Amaru says that it is a nice gesture, but
honestly, it's logistically impossible for restaurants to see who is vaccinated and who is not, to try to tell a fake vaccination slip from a real one, because it inevitably is what will happen.
The chef says Amaru had tried to figure out a way to work this in so they could have more people at the restaurant, but decided that it would just be a total nightmare.
Tempted to think that we can do more, but for us, we've taken the approach that we're going to try to keep surviving the way we've been doing and making sure that our guests feel safe. You know, if I'm vaccinated, you wouldn't know that necessarily. So you're going to feel uncomfortable that I'm a little too close to you, or I'm counting against the total amount of guests that can be in the room and whatnot.
So one idea that the governor was asked about was a vaccine passport, something that people could show to prove that they have been vaccinated for COVID-19. Pritzker says he kind of likes the idea, maybe a phone application that somebody can show for their vaccination status. But he says it has to not be mandatory.
I do like the idea, though, that everybody will have with them easily on their device. Most people carry their devices with them, some way to show that they've been vaccinated. Look, your friends, your neighbors, when you all want to get together, you may also want to show each other that, hey, it's okay, we can take our masks off as is directed. The CDC is allowed, as long as the group of people getting together have all been vaccinated.
When I asked Chef Quadros about this, by the way, as he was getting meals ready for what he hopes is going to be a busy night, given that it is restaurant week, it seems a little late for something like that, recognizing a whole lot of logistics went into vaccinations, but this is something that needed to be done before we saw things like 5 million doses of COVID vaccine having been put in people's arms here in Illinois. Now, all of this comes, though, as Chicago's public health director has signaled a worrisome rise in COVID cases in the city. Now, the state's reopening plan could go in the opposite direction of reopening and instead lead to more restrictions if that continues.
I don't expect us to get there, but I've been to this movie before and seen, the rising positivity rates, and I'm concerned about it. And I've been saying all along, even as we have addressed the mitigations and tried to lower mitigations here or there, I've said we got to be careful about the variants.
Now, to help prevent any sort of reopening reversal, of course, wear a mask and then get vaccinated. Chicago is massively expanding eligibility starting Monday. And then, of course, statewide, everyone is eligible starting April 12th. So if you're in the city, you can go to one of those state-run vaccination sites elsewhere starting April 12th. Paris, back to you.
Moving fast, but we have to keep our eye on those rising numbers. All right. Amanda, thank you very much. And now to Brandis with a look at a big upcoming change to CPS school hallways. Brandis.
Paris, while several Chicago public schools have removed police officers from their buildings, 55 schools in the city still have what are called school resource officers. Today, after months of engagement with students, parents, and other partners, the school district and 5 community organizations laid out recommendations for those schools to pursue a more holistic approach to safety. As the district noted in a school board presentation today, the exclusionary disciplinary actions of officers in schools still, quote, disproportionately impact students of color. Joining us now with more are Maria DeHelio, coordinator of Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, or VOICE, one of the 5 community organizations working with the school district, and Chicago Public Schools Chief Safety and Security Officer Jadine Chow. Welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight, and welcome back to you. Jadine, let's start with you, please. What are some of the alternative approaches to safety that the school district is recommending here?
We're so excited, and thank you again for having us tonight. It's so important to just start by saying we asked our community organizations to come up with recommendations that really transcend different areas beyond just conventional physical safety. So we asked them to look at emotional safety and what we call relational trust safety as well. A lot of the ideas that came up from their many sessions with public community engagement stakeholders came up with ideas that include things like restorative justice practices that we would like to implement school-wide, particularly if we look at those efforts being led by community and students. Look at mental health supports for our students, particularly in sense of capacity as well as capability. So making sure that the people we do have the right skill set so that they're looking at things from a trauma-informed lens and making sure that we're not inflicting more harm on our young people through these experiences. Another one I'll highlight, which is so important, is finding ways to elevate student voice. And so giving our young people more opportunities to be leaders, giving them opportunities to have more control of their destiny in terms of governance. So those are just a few of the examples that they came up with.
Maria, your organization, of course, you all work very closely with students and held several student town halls on this subject. What kind of change have you heard from students? What kind of change would they like to see in the school resource officer program?
Thank you again for having us. So yes, my name is Maria. I'm the coordinator with VOICE, and VOICE has been, since our inception, has been all about centering the voices of Black and Brown youth in order to promote and advance healing-centered learning environments in schools. So for us, this effort was really about making sure that we have the values of youth-centered solutions be from the very beginning until the very end when it comes to the recommendations and crafting of the recommendations. We held, like you said, 3 different town halls. They were all youth-led, one of which was only young people were allowed to be in the town halls so that we could have something that was focused on young folks. And then the other was bilingual in Spanish and English. And the other one was intergenerational. Some of the things that we heard from young people for us has really been the need to invest and increase the investment in mental health and access to mental health. A lot of it has also to do with enhancing or even creating a behavioral health team in the school that could really get to the root cause of the issue when it comes to disciplinary actions. So those were some of the things that we saw, including I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, what are some of the problems that students have expressed having had with a school resource officer? And we should mention that, we invited a member of Chicago Police Department to join us this evening. They were unable to. But what have students said are some of the problems or the challenges with having a police officer in their schools?
Well, and, Jadine knows this. When we first got invited to the table for VOICE, it was a very... it took us a while to make that decision because the reality is everybody knows that VOICE's stance on police in schools has been a full removal of police officers in schools and a full investment in mental health and positive youth leadership development. So we have a lot of background where some of our young people have been arrested for writing their names on a desk with a pencil, or our young people have been handcuffed to a pipe for 5 hours, right? So these were horror stories that we were hearing at the very beginning, which is really what led VOICE to take such a strong position. And that's the reason why it was a difficult decision, but it was also a really good opportunity to be part of this whole school safety committee so that we could really take a holistic approach to safety that is engaged in authentic process of youth voices and community voices. And that's really what we went through here, because the 5 different organizations that are part of this whole school committee, we all stand differently in this issue, which is why it was challenging, but it was also authentic.
And Jadine, for these 55 schools that still have school resource officers, what is the likelihood that, when it is up to the schools to sort of decide what their plan, what their safety plan looks like, what's the likelihood that they will actually decide to release one or both of their SROs?
I think that this is really the time where schools are starting to consider what we mean by whole school safety. So I think that as I've begun talking to principals and to parents and to teachers, they're saying, okay, well, maybe with this now new option of trading in my SRO to get alternatives, that means alternative resources, alternative programs, maybe this is a good way to sort of test it out and see if we're comfortable with making that move. This is what's different with the process this time, is we are giving them the flexibility to look at possibly removing just one, and it's not an all or nothing. And also the other thing that's different is that we're helping to identify these alternate ideas, strategies that they can use to replace what they felt they were using the SROs for. But in this case, though, getting to the root of the issue. And that is something that, again, we want to work in phase 2 to help schools really think through, what does that mean?
And
what are we
Jadine,
afraid of?
and we've got about 15 seconds left. Explain quickly, if you would, phase 2 and what the schools are being tasked with now.
So essentially, schools will be tasked with forming whole school safety committees at the school level. They will be able to review the recommendations. We'll get partnerships to help think through, subject matter experts to help think through what is best for that school level. And then in June, we'll ask the local school councils to vote again on their whole school safety plan.
Okay, June, we'll probably be talking about this again down the road. My thanks to CPS Chief Safety and Security Officer Jadine Chow and Maria DeHelio of Voice. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you again.
And now back to Paris for a look at returning to the workplace. Paris.
Brandis, the increase in vaccinations and the potential for a light at the end of the COVID tunnel presents a vexing question for many Chicago workers. Do I go back to the office? While some may have gotten used to the comforts of home, others may be itching to get out. And the stakes couldn't be higher for the city, especially for owners and managers of the massive pieces of real estate in the central business district that are still sitting mostly vacant. The Loop has been a ghost town for a year. But it has been here before during tough economic times, like in the 1980s.
In a lot of ways, we're at the same place. People are feeling that downtown is maybe a little less healthy, a little less safe than it used to be.
The Central Core then boomed before hitting another roadblock after 9/11.
No one wanted to be in a high-rise office building ever again. 20 years later, people are in high-rise office buildings.
But the challenges brought about by COVID-19 and shutdowns will reverberate in the Loop long after people come back to work. According to the Building Owners and Managers Association, or BOMA, between 88 and 92% of workers who would normally be in their office are still not back. The rate of office subleases is at an all-time high, and the Chicago Tribune reports the overall Loop office building vacancy rate is 15%. And it could go higher. But building owners say the true damage won't be known until long-term leases expire in a year or so.
We have been ready for people to come back in the building, and it's just a matter of people feeling comfortable coming back into the building.
Derek Johnson manages several buildings in the Loop for the property management firm Zeller, including 311 South Wacker. He says the building has been retrofitted for safety and sanitation, but more important, he says, is incorporating some comforts of home into the office.
Whether it's, tinted apps, you pick up your dry cleaning or have things delivered, and, we have to figure out a way to be more efficient.
Johnson says the building plans on having regular concerts in its outdoor plaza, and all buildings will have to plan street-level events to not only lure workers back, but keep them throughout the day.
the experience of the office and your experience downtown is going to need to shift and change.
Cheryl Schultz leads repositioning and landlord services for the design firm Gensler. A survey the company published revealed that 70% of respondents plan to go back to the office all or most of the week, while 30% said they wanted flexible work schedules. She says the cubicles and walls are going to have to come down in favor of more social and outdoor space.
Access to health and wellness, access to the outdoors, access to places outside of your tenant space.
A big focus right now is bringing residents back.
Samir Mayakar is Chicago's deputy mayor for neighborhood and economic development. He says the Loop's future is contingent on building a mixed-use neighborhood with equal amounts of office, retail, residential, and entertainment.
That could involve maybe changing zoning so that some of the older buildings downtown might be repurposed as hotels or as apartments. This is something that we've seen both here in Chicago and in large cities like New York. So I would expect more adaptability from the city so that we can rise to the challenge and the opportunity.
Planners say the ideal model is the nearby West Loop and Fulton Market area, booming with development in every sector. Farzin Parang is BOMA's executive director. He acknowledges some nervousness on the part of Loop building managers, but it's not like Chicago is alone.
At the end of the day, we will bounce back, and it's just a question of how are we bouncing back relative to our competitors.
On that front, Parang says the future looks promising.
There are challenges ahead, but we're obviously optimistic. We're bullish in Chicago. We believe in Chicago. This is our home, and so we're going to get through those challenges.
And up next, a plan to add parking meters to the lakefront. It has some residents up in arms, so please stick around.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. What do you believe prevents a strong coalition of Black and Latino communities forming across the communities?
I want us to, as a nation, to find a way to come together.
Go down the block, get it from someone local, and keep the money in the community.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
Metered parking is coming to Montrose Harbor, and some residents are not too pleased with that. The change happened quietly when it was passed by City Council last November. Joining us now with more are Juanita Irizarry, Executive Director of Friends of the Parks, and Val Free, the Executive Director of the Neighborhood Network Alliance. Thanks to you both for joining us. And we should mention that we invited Alderman James Kappelman, whose 46th ward includes Montrose Harbor, to join us, but he declined our invitation. He did send a statement, which we will get to in just a bit. We also invited the city to send a representative, but we have heard no response as of yet. Juanita Irizarry, welcome back. Let's start with you, please. What is your reaction to the addition of these meters?
Well, first of all, the process by which this decision was made was clearly one that did not engage the community. The alderman just to the north, Harry Osterman, decided not to have meters put in his part of the park. And so we really think this is a good opportunity for Chicago to really call for a much better conversation about whether we should even have paid parking at our lakefront parks at all.
Who do you feel like this decision impacts the most?
Obviously, low-income users of parks are likely to be priced out. And that's a problem all over the city, not just at Montrose Beach. But because it is used by such a diverse set of folks, I think it's really drawn a lot of attention in this particular case.
Val Free, these meters have been in South Shore for years at this point. What is your reaction to the sudden push against them on the north side?
Well, I have a couple things. First of all, my reaction is this cry should have happened 10 years ago. It should not be happening now. We've been crying about it for at least 10 years in South Shore. What we see is our community members who are low and medium income families don't really come to the park as families unless they drive there and don't pay the parking and risk taking a ticket, receiving a ticket. So I really think that this is a good opportunity to see what we could do to change this. but it definitely has to look at what's already happening in our parks. If we're talking about reducing crime, if you're pushing the people who need to be in the parks out, how do you do that?
So we invited, as I mentioned, Alderman James Kappelman on, who voted yes for these meters, and his ward includes Montrose Beach. He had a prior engagement this evening, but he did send us a statement, and it reads in part, quote, given that the parks in areas of very high poverty have parking meters, areas that are predominantly white should be doing the same, if not more, to help carry the load. When I vote on a budget, I take all of Chicago in mind, not just the 46th ward. We must deal with the city's tale of two cities. Residents on the south and west sides of the city deserve fairer treatment that is long overdue. Val, what's your reaction to that statement?
Oh, I think he should have been in face of let's not pay for parking. How about that, instead of continuing this particular this route? Because again, we're looking at people who do not take their children to the park because it could cost them a minimum of $40.
Juanita, what is your reaction? Is metered parking not a way to control crowds, or in the case in the case that Alderman Kappelman lays out, he suggested it's a matter of the north side and other residents having to carry the pay for parking load?
Yeah, I think the pay for parking load is really complicated, and I do think we need to point out that on the far south side at Calumet Park, there's free parking right at the beach at the lakefront, and Steelworkers Park has free parking. There's other places on the north side where there are parking lots that you pay, and including at Montrose and at Foster, there are paid parking lots. These are the streets in the park, and the streets in the park are controlled by the city of Chicago rather than the park district, and it's important to just break down some of the distinctions here. If we want to talk about the parks through the streets and the parks, maybe we should look at Lincoln Park down by Lincoln Park Zoo, for example, which is an area where there are no meters, and relatively wealthy Chicagoans get to use those parks and those streets as their overnight parking. They get to stay there as long as they want, often not moving their cars until there's street cleaning. And then folks like me who live west of there, I live in Humboldt Park, and that would be my beach. I can't go and park my car there because the parking doesn't turn over. And I mentioned that because Alderman Kappelman also referenced the turnover of parking spaces at Montrose as part of what we're trying to accomplish.
Well, and so to that end, then, do you think that this will be the case, that it will help with parking turnover if there are meters?
Well, there are those who can afford it who will probably just keep paying the parking meter over and over and over again. And those who can't afford it will probably have to look for somewhere else to enjoy a park.
Yeah. And what, Val, sorry, we've got just a few seconds left, but how have you seen the addition of the meters affect the amount of people who use the beaches and parks?
Well, you have people who would normally drive their cars to the lakefront and get out and walk. A lot of them don't do that anymore. You have, again, family members who would have holidays and things like that, celebrations at the park. You don't see it as much. Now, mind you, the parks are still full, but in a lot of cases, they're not paying the fees and they're risking the cost of a ticket.
Okay, so some questions to be asked there. My thanks to Juanita Irizarry and Val Free for joining us. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And for more on this story, visit our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And while you're there, check out our story on efforts to protect the piping plover habitat, also at Montrose Beach. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, aldermen pass a measure that could reduce air pollution on Chicago's south and west sides, but not everyone's breathing easy. Chicago has more lead service pipes than any other city, and Illinois more than any other state. What's being done to address the issue?
It seems that there's a VIP line for certain people.
And employees of a Gold Coast steakhouse, reportedly the latest VIPs to get some of Loretto Hospital's vaccines. That and more in Spotlight Politics. But first, some more of our top stories. U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth says she will continue to support President Joe Biden's cabinet and other administrative nominees now that the White House has said Biden will appoint an Asian American Pacific Islander liaison to its staff. Duckworth and Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono had called out the administration for not having enough AAPI representation and threatened to withhold support until the issue was addressed. But in a statement last night, a Duckworth spokesperson said the senator, quote, appreciates the Biden administration's assurances that it will do much more to elevate AAPI voices and perspectives at the highest levels of government, including appointing an AAPI senior White House official to represent the community, secure the confirmation of AAPI appointments, and advance policy proposals that are relevant and important to the community. The Chicago Police Department is working to diversify its next class of recruits through a series of videos released today.
It's needed. It's needed because you have to be able to relate to people on their level to help them. So, how do we relate if we don't understand where they're coming from?
CPD is offering its first entrance exam since January of 2020 and says the series of videos is part of its Be the Change recruitment campaign. The videos feature several high-ranking department members discussing the importance of diversity among the ranks and their own experiences as Chicago police officers. Applications for the exam are being accepted through April 9th. And now to Paris with details about today's City Council meeting. Paris.
Brandon, City Council passed several measures today, including new rules that could affect air pollution on the south and west sides. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with highlights from today's meeting. Hey, Heather, so first on the agenda, City Council approves a measure to tighten regulations on recycling centers and industrial operations to reduce air pollution on the south and west sides, but it passes without the support of some of the environmentalists who were first pushing this. So here's what Alderman Michael Rodriguez said. He voted against the resolution.
In the last waning days of this ordinance, there were concessions, and those concessions were to industry. I think that when we study our history and we look particularly at the federal governments and at industrial regulation, we find that whenever we go after industry to be more accountable to community, more engaging, the sky falls.
So Heather, what's the verdict here for environmentalists?
Well, they don't consider this ordinance a win, and they are very frustrated that Mayor Lightfoot and the aldermen who supported it are characterizing it as something that will improve air quality on the south and west side, which is much worse than in other parts of the city, particularly downtown and on the north side. Particularly, they're upset that these new regulations don't apply to warehouses like the ones that Target and other e-commerce giants are building in Chicago to cover that last mile to people's homes. They wanted much stricter regulations so that neighborhoods aren't choked with traffic and diesel fumes.
And there was supposed to be a warehouse going in the space of where the plant in Little Village came down, as I understand. All right, another measure passed today requiring developers who want to demolish existing buildings in Pilsen and near the 606 Bloomingdale Tray to pay a fee up to $15,000. Remind us how that works.
Well, what's happened along the 606 trail is that the real estate market has just exploded. So you've got 2 or 3 flat buildings are being torn down to make way for multi-million-dollar mansions. And that is pushing longtime residents, primarily Latino residents, out of the area and forcing them to find somewhere new to live. So for a year, demolition has been banned along the 606 trail. This ordinance replaces that ban in the hopes that it will tamp down that real estate market and allow more people to stay in their homes. The demolition ban is also in effect now in Pilsen, which is another red hot neighborhood where there has been a lot of gentrification and a lot of displacement of longtime residents who are also Latino. And we heard from Alderman Byron Sigcho Lopez, who represent Pilsen, who said that this was really designed to protect the social fabric of Pilsen. And of course, whether it works is very much an open question, but it will serve as a sort of pilot program for other neighborhoods also facing gentrification and displacement pressures.
Always a hot topic. All right, finally, Heather, Alderman held an impromptu debate today about reparations. How did that come up and how was it resolved?
Well, the city council was expected to pass, and they did, a non-binding resolution calling on Mayor Lightfoot to take about $50 million from the latest COVID-19 relief package coming from the federal government to send cash payments to residents of Chicagoans who are really struggling to stay afloat amid the economic collapse of the pandemic. However, Alderman Jason Irvin, who's the chairman of the city council's Black Caucus, objected, saying that reparations should be at the top of the city's priority list if they're talking about sending cash to Chicagoans who need help. And he was joined by several other members of the Black Caucus in voting against this resolution, which has no force of law. And this really sets up, I think, a real push toward reparations. Perhaps some of the elected officials have been looking northward and seeing all of the headlines that Evanston has gotten from becoming the first in the nation to do it, and they are jumping on this topic as well.
Yeah, it seems like Evanston might lead to further action in Chicago and other cities. All right, Heather, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
Illinois has more lead service water pipes than any other state in the nation, and Chicago more than any other city. In fact, Illinois may have as much as a quarter of all lead service pipes in the country. That's according to Senator Tammy Duckworth, who is leading the push for a bipartisan infrastructure bill to rebuild the nation's water systems. Here's some of what she had to say, citing data from a Chicago Tribune report as the bill passed unanimously out of committee today.
Between 2015 and 2020, tap water measurements in dozens of Illinois homes showed hundreds and even thousands of parts per billion of lead. These extreme levels match what researchers found during the same period in Flint, Michigan. As is with many problems in our nation, this lead contamination is often the worst in Black and brown communities.
And joining us are Angela Tovar, the City of Chicago's Chief Sustainability Officer, and Jeremy Orr, Senior Attorney at the Natural Resources Defense Council, where he focuses on their Safe Water Initiative. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago tonight. So first, Jeremy Orr, a primer, remind us why lead service lines for water can be so dangerous.
Yeah, so as we've seen, what really popped up on the scene in 2015 following the Flint water crisis is, these lead service lines are all over the country, and in particular in places like Chicago, where we have the most lead service lines in the country. It's like drinking through essentially what we call a lead straw. And the reason lead is so dangerous is because it is a neurotoxin that causes irreversible harm. So once it's in your system, it's hard to get out, and once the damage is done, it's done.
And Angela Tovar, the City of Chicago has noted this. It started years ago to replace some of the lead service lines. Before 1983, they were all lead service lines. Where is the city on that effort right now?
So you're right. The city has allowed lead service lines until 1986, and that's when the federal government prohibited the practice. So as a result, here in Chicago, we have many single family and two flats that have lead service lines. And the Department of Water Management estimates that there are 380,000 service lines in the city of Chicago. This administration is the first administration to step up to address the removal of the lines. We have started by identifying some sources of funding to tackle the issue. And we have two programs that we're putting forth, an equity lead service line replacement program and a homeowner initiative program. The first would be an income qualified program where homeowners would be eligible to receive the full lead service line replacement through grant funding. And the second is a program that allows homeowners to initiate the process on their own to have the fees waived to enable the process to move forward.
And I want to get back to some of those programs in a minute, but Jeremy, first of the statistics we mentioned at the top, Chicago, #1 lead service lines among cities, Illinois, #1 among states. How did they get those distinctions?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Angela mentioned, the idea that, the city of Chicago and other cities around the state of Illinois allowed the use of lead service lines through 1986, which we know to be, long after it was recognized that lead service lines were toxic and were causing harm. So when you have, places like Illinois who were using these pipes for years after, they were found to be dangerous, and other cities and other states stopped using them, you get this abundance of lead service lines throughout the city and throughout the state, much more than other places who stopped using them sooner.
And speaking of places that have an abundance of them, the data shows that Black and brown communities are twice as likely to live in areas with lead service lines than white communities. Why the disparities?
You know, I think when I look at that, as the data has shown, you know, not just in Chicago, but around the entire state of Illinois, that 95% of the lead service lines are located predominantly in Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian communities. And I think when we look at issues like that, we look at issues of environmental justice, where we know that particularly communities of color and low-income communities typically bear the brunt of environmental injustice. So when we think about how long those lead service lines were used, all the way through 1986, many of those lead service lines were still being used predominantly in those, you know, low-income communities that now we're seeing, as we do our inventories and figure out where the lead pipes are, we're subject to the use of lead, while other communities may have been using other more appropriate, safer forms of drinking water distribution.
And maybe it shows more affluent communities started removing those lead lines earlier. Angela Tovar, back to those problems. So you're a Chicago homeowner. How do you know what kind of service lines that you have, and then how do you qualify for having the replacement paid for?
Sure. Well, anyone in Chicago that wants to know whether or not they have a lead service line can call 311, and a kit will be shipped for you. We will take water samples, and the Department of Water Management will actually come and pick those up, and a certified lab will process and will provide you with your results. You can then, if you are income qualified, so if you have a household income below 80% of the area median income level, which in Chicago is $72,800 for a family of 4, and if you own your own home, and if you test, right, if your tests reveal that you have a higher threshold, which is the EPA action level of 15 parts per billion, you are eligible for the program. The homeowner initiated program, again, if a homeowner wants to hire a contractor to come and remove their lead service lines, we will waive those permit fees. And there is information on both of those programs on our city's website. We have a dedicated website for more information, and that's at leadsafechicago.org.
All right, and Jeremy, we mentioned the state's problems. Are there legislative efforts at the states to replace, at the state level, to replace Illinois' lines in other towns outside Chicago? And then what about the bill that Duckworth sponsored in the federal government?
Yeah, there's actually a Illinois Lead Service Line Replacement and Notification Act bill that's in the legislature right now, which was introduced this session in the House and in the Senate. What it does is it mandates the replacement of all lead service lines. It requires an inventory. It also bans this dangerous practice of partial lead service line replacement, which is when you replace the public side and not the private side, which typically increases lead in your drinking water in your home. And it creates a fee or a funding source so that all utilities can share the cost of replacing the lead service lines, and it isn't just placed on the ratepayer. And at the federal level, as you've seen with Duckworth's legislation as well, which she's been a great champion on drinking water infrastructure, it's allocated significantly more money for lead service line replacement in particular in vulnerable and low-income communities, which is, you know, what a place like Chicago and Illinois really needs, because, you know, there's funding needed to get this work done.
All right, we'll have to follow these efforts as they progress. Our thanks to Angela Tovar and Jeremy Orr. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And for more details of the city's lead service line replacement program, visit our website. And up next, our Spotlight Politics team with some breaking news at Loretto Hospital. But first, a look at the weather.
The city cracks down on vaccines going into the arms of line jumpers as city and state officials worry about the spike in infections. All that and much more are the focus of our Spotlight Politics team. Welcome back, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutt. So as we said, we've got some breaking news tonight, guys. We're just learning that Loretto Hospital's COO, Dr. Anosh Ahmed, resigned from his post. This after accusations continue to mount against Loretto Hospital's exclusive vaccine distribution, with one ER employee saying there was a VIP line. Take a look.
We know our community. Me being an ER tech, I know my community. I've been there for 15 years. So I've seen certain people all the time. I've seen co-workers, family, loved ones. But then we get certain different groups of people that have come to the hospital all of a sudden. And it's like, it seems kind of odd. At times, it seems that there's a VIP line for certain people.
Paris, the story just keeps getting worse and worse, and I know you've done some reporting on this. The hospital denying those VIP lines, but today there were new revelations about employees at a Gold Coast steakhouse that the COO used to frequent, that they got vaccines. The restaurant denies this, and now we're hearing that the COO has resigned.
Yeah, and again, this was from Block Club, another connection to the COO, Ahmed, that has resigned. And we have an exclusive story on our website about these so-called VIP lines that workers started complaining about, apparently, since the vaccine distribution began back in January. Now, what happened was several workers started raising eyebrows at groups of people they say were being ushered to the front of the line. Now, what they'll say is ethnically, demographically, they were not the normal patients of Loretto Hospital. They were not West Side residents, according to these workers. So they brought their complaints to the union, SEIU Healthcare. I spoke with the person that represents Loretto's workers with the union, Ann Igo, and basically what she said was they fielded all these complaints. They went to the CEO, George Miller. Miller denied that there was anything improper, that there was any kind of VIP access, that anyone was getting special access, basically turned a cold shoulder on that. And so, you know, the employees said that that wasn't acceptable. That, and of course, you heard on our show last night, Mr. Thomas saying it, spoke to some other employees that were echoing those same things. And of course, WBZ reports that judges were improperly getting vaccinated there, and then all those other revelations from Block Club. And now we learn in a statement that the board has voted to accept the resignation of the COO, Anosha Med, who's at the center of all these. And, you know, we still have more questions. Is there a severance package? How much is that? So we're going to have to see how that plays out.
And a lot more, I'm sure, we'll learn in the coming days, as so many reporters are following this, yourself included. Amanda, there are a number of state representatives, though, on the executive board of Loretto Hospital. One of them, Representative LaShawn Ford, who joined Paris here on the show last night, stepping down from the hospital's board of trustees. Why are 3 lawmakers associated with this hospital?
So you have one state representative. These are all Democrats from Chicago, all Black individuals. You have LaShawn Ford, who, as you noted, has resigned over frustrations with how this was handled. State Senator Kim Lightford is on the board. In fact, she is the vice chair of it. And then Camille Lilly isn't on the board, but she serves as I believe, the vice president of external affairs. This, of course, as Loretto is coming under fire, not just for the vaccine situation, but also for its handling of it and a lack of transparency, including what sort of reprimand the CEO, George Miller, was given. He has not resigned or been terminated at all, nor has he really answered any questions to
No, he hasn't. And what we've learned, Amanda, is that he is still working at the hospital. So reprimand just was kind of a word. There's no paid or unpaid leave, but we've heard from several workers and Loretto that Miller is still working at the hospital. And up until today, Ahmed was still working there too, just not doing vaccinations.
And Heather, you know, when, if ever, will Loretto start to get more vaccines, according to the mayor and CDPH?
Not anytime soon. They are indefinitely cut off, and I would be surprised if their access is ever restored. The city is moving forward with plans to contract with other companies to make sure that the residents of Austin, which has been particularly hard hit by the pandemic, have access to the vaccine. But I can tell you that my inbox has been filled with people worried that they're not going to be able to, you know, keep their appointment that they made several weeks ago, or they're not going to be able to come back for their second dose. So there's a lot of concern that all of this scandal will, of course, land hardest on those most vulnerable to the pandemic, those Black Chicagoans who need these life-saving vaccines that are still in very short supply.
Now, there's also concern about CPS employees because, you know, earlier this week, the mayor said, you know, she predicted that, unfortunately, there may be more stories like this, and there has been. The city is pulling vaccines from Innovative Express Care. It's the company that was giving CPS employees vaccines under a $5 million contract. Innovative Express Care, Heather, is defending their distribution. The mayor disagrees, saying there was no communication breakdown. What happened in this instance, Heather?
Well, it seems like Innovative Express Care took all of the vaccine that they were given by CDPH and put it in every available arm. Well, the city says that they shouldn't have done that. They should have held back a portion to make sure that all of those CPS workers were able to get a second shot, and that they should not have been offered to other people other than CPS workers. Now, the CEO of the company, who's been very public on Facebook saying we didn't do anything wrong, he said, look, what we did was try to get as much vaccine in as many people as possible. But Mayor Lightfoot today, after today's city council meeting, was not having that. She said, no, they broke the agreement that they made with the city and they're cut off. And this was no small amount of vaccine. This was a $5 million contract. And Brandis, you had covered what a hot button issue it was for the teachers to get vaccinated before schools reopened. So the mayor was very, very clear that this was unacceptable.
Absolutely. And we're talking about 6,000 vaccines that CDPH is saying were misallocated. But Amanda, meanwhile, COVID infections are trending up. How concerned are individuals?
Well, I think officials are most certainly concerned. And as I talked earlier about this bridge phase that Illinois is really getting pretty close to, well, we might not see that same sort of thing, even if the state guidelines, yet again, the mayor signaling that she may go stricter, and in fact, likely not planning to, even if that threshold is met statewide of 70% of individuals 65 and older, that's not going to happen because of this increase in cases. And the governor also saying that he's fearful that people, be it because of the weather, more vaccines, other states' actions, or what, that people are just giving up on the guidelines that he still wants to be followed.
Now, turning to the city council meeting today, Heather, Mayor Lightfoot is hoping to boost the number of affordable homes in Chicago and fight segregation. Tell us about that.
Well, this has been a rewrite of the city's affordable requirement ordinance long in the works. Mayor Lightfoot campaigned on this issue, and she said that Chicago needs to do more to build affordable homes. And so she formed a task force. And last September, that task force found that basically the current law had only created less than 1,100 affordable apartments, and that those apartments were not affordable for Black and Latino Chicagoans. So the new proposal, which is just a proposal, it's not clear whether it will make it all the way through the city council, would basically increase fees for developers who want to build in wealthy areas that trigger the ordinance, and it gives the developers more incentive to build apartments that would be affordable for lower income Chicagoans and to build family size units. It's very hard to find a family size affordable unit in Chicago. And this ordinance is going to try to sort of chip away at that shortfall. But it's just a huge problem, and we are just starting this debate.
In Paris, after Evanston passes a first-of-its-kind reparations fund, the Chicago City Council is debating reparations. What could we see here? Something similar?
It remains to be seen what kind of package Mayor Lightfoot is going to support. I think she said she supported the concept of it, but not specifics. In Evanston, it's some of that marijuana revenue being used for housing. Will it look like that in Chicago? I don't think anybody knows. I think the Black Caucus is going to come forward with exactly what their proposal is, and it would seem to have a majority of support on the city council. The idea of it, but the specifics we don't know.
So in state news, Governor Pritzker getting his getting his only shot, his COVID vaccine, on camera today, the one-shot Johnson & Johnson dose. Amanda, do the photo ops at this point, are they making a difference for folks who might be vaccine hesitant, and what took him so long?
I am guessing that if somebody is truly vaccine hesitant, what would truly help would be hearing from doctors, physicians, those who really study the data and can say what happens to the human body versus a politician. Then again, celebrity endorsements are a very powerful thing, evidently, or they wouldn't continue to happen. I'm not sure we're going to consider a politician a celebrity there, but I do think this is a case of sort of practice what you preach. And the governor, all elected officials really in sort of a tough spot of you want to get it to set an example and for their own protection because they're out and about. And at the same time, not wanting to seem as if, as this Loretto story shows, there is great frustration when it feels like somebody is cutting. And so he did get that shot. He waited that long because I think he was fearful of this public relations, perhaps nightmare, if it was seen as if he was getting ahead of other people. He says that he wanted everybody to, have their chance.
So in our ongoing coverage, we're going to go out on this one tonight, guys. Paris, the piping plovers at Montrose Beach may just get a bigger nest. What do we know? What gives?
We know that Monty and Rose are really romantic, and that dance that the plovers do is something else. Look at that. Look at the way. Look at the way Rose is kind of like, well, I'm not that interested, and Monty's really working hard. He really has to work here to get her love. But yeah, no, Alderman Kappelman, who you talked about earlier, wants, I think a larger area to have people be able to sort of witness the plovers and keep them safe. Yeah.
Obviously, we're going to follow the story very closely. In the meantime, my thanks to Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. And you can read more about the stories discussed tonight with our Spotlight Politics team on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud of its partners named Illinois Leading Lawyers by the Law Bulletin Publishing Company of Chicago.
This evening's